I have often wondered if the majority of mankind ever paused to reflect upon the occasional titanic significance of dreams, and of the obscure world to which they belong, whilst the greater number of our nocturnal visions are perhaps no more than a faint, fantastic reflection of our waking experiences. Freud, to the contrary, with his puerile symbolism, there is still a certain remainder whose mundane and ethereal character permit no ordinary interpretation, and whose vaguely exciting and disquieting effects suggest possible mythic glimpses into the sphere of mental existence no less important than physical life, yet separated from that life by an all but impassable barrier. From my experience, I cannot doubt but that man, when lost to terrestrial consciousness, is indeed sojourning into another and uncorporeal life, of a far different nature than the life we know, and of which only the slightest and most indistinct memories linger after waking. From those blurred and fragmentary memories we infer very much, yet prove very little. We may guess that in dreams, life, matter, and vitality, as the earth knows such things, are not necessarily constant, and that time and space do not exist as our waking selves comprehend them. Sometimes I believe that this less material life is our truer life, and that our vain presence on this terraqueous globe is itself the secondary or merely virtual phenomenon. It was a useful reverie, filled with speculations of this sort, that I arose one afternoon in the winter of 1900, when to the state psychopathic institution in which I served as an intern was brought the man whose case has ever since haunted me so unceasingly. His name, as given on the records, was Joe Slater, or Slatter as he was called, and his appearance was that of a typical denizen of the Catskill Mountain region, one of those strange, repellent scions of the primitive colonial peasant stock whose isolations for nearly 3 centuries in this hilly vastness of our little-traveled countryside has caused them to sink to a kind of barbaric degeneracy, rather than advanced with the more fortunately placed brethren of their thickly settled districts. Among these odd folks who correspond exactly to the decadent element of white trash in the South, law and morals are non-existent, and their general mental stasis is probably below any other section of Native American people. Joe Slater, who came to the institution with a vigilant custody of our 4 state policemen, and who was described as a highly dangerous character, certainly presented no evidence of his perilous disposition when I first beheld him. Though well above the middle stature, and of somewhat brawny frame, he was given an absurd appearance of harmless stupidity by the pale, sleepy blueness of his small, watery eyes, the scantness of his neglected and never-shaven grown of his yellow beard, and the listless drooping of his heavy nether lip. His age was unknown, since among his kind neither family records nor permanent family ties exist. But from this baldness of his head in front, and from this decayed condition of his teeth, the head surgeon wrote him down as a man about 40. From the medical and court documents, we learned all that could be gathered of this case. This man, the vagabond, hunter and trapper, had always been strange in the eyes of his primitive associates. He had habitually slept at night, beyond the ordinary time, and upon waking would often talk of unknown things in a manner so bizarre as to inspire fear, even in the hearts of the unimaginative populace. Not that his form of language was all that unusual, but for that he had never spoken, save in a debased pastoius of his environment, but the tone and tenor of his utterances were of such mysterious wilderness that none might listen without apprehension. He himself was generally as terrified and as baffled as his auditors, and within an hour after wakening he would forget all that he had said, or at least all that had caused him to say what he said, relapse into a bovine, half-amiable normality like that of his other hill-dwellers. As Slater grew older, it appeared his matutinal aberrations had gradually increased in frequency and violence, till about a month before his arrival at the institution had occurrences of shocking tragedy which caused his arrest by the authorities. One day, near noon, after a profound sleep begun in a whiskey debauch, at about 5 of the previous after of the prelations so horrible and unearthly that they brought several neighbors able to himself. Rushing out into the snow, he had flung his arms aloft and commenced with a series of leaps directly upward into the air, the while shouting his determination to reach some big cabin with brightness in the roof and walls and floor and loud queer music far away. As two men of moderate size sought to restrain him, he had struggled in a maniacal force and fury, screaming of his desire and need to find and kill a certain thing that shines and shakes and laughs. At length, and temporarily feeling one of his detainers with a sudden blow, he had flung himself upon one another in a demonic ecstasy of bloodthirstiness, shrieking fiendishly that he would jump high into the air and burn his way through anything that stopped him. Family and neighbors had now fled in a panic, and when the more courageous of them returned, Slater was gone, leaving behind an unrecognizable pulp-like thing that had never been a living man but an hour before. None of these mountaineers had dared pursue him, and it is likely that they would have welcomed his death from the cold. But when several mornings later they heard his screams from a distant ravine, they realized that they had somehow managed to survive, and that his removal in one way or another would be necessary. Then followed an armed searching party, whose purpose, whatever it may have been originally, became that of a sheriff's posse after one of a seldom popular state troopers had accidentally observed, then questioned, and finally joined the Skeeters. On the third day, Slater was found unconscious in a hollow-out tree, and taken to the nearest jail where alienists from Albany examined him as soon as his senses returned. To them he told a simple story. He had, he said, gone to sleep one afternoon, about sundown, after drinking much liquor. He had awakened to find himself standing bloody-handed in the snow before his cabin, the mangled corpse of his neighbor Peter Slater at his feet. Horrified, he had taken to the woods in a vague effort to escape from the scene of what must have been his crime. Beyond these things, he seemed to know nothing, nor could the expert question of his interrogators bring out a single additional fact. That night Slater slept quietly, and the next morning he awakened to no singular feature save a certain alteration of his expression. Dr. Bernard, who had been watching the patient, though he noticed in the pale blue eyes of the certain gleam of peculiar quality, and in the flaccid lips, an all but imperceptible, what a weird word, tightening, as if, or intelligent determination. But one question, Slater relapsed into a habitual vacancy of the mountaineer, and only reiterated what he had said on the preceding day. On the third morning occurred the first of the man's mental attacks. After some show of uneasiness in his sleep, he burst forth into a frenzy so powerful that the combined efforts of 4 men were needed to bind him to his straitjacket. The alienists listened with keen attention to his words, since their curiosity had been aroused to a high pitch of their suggestive, yet mostly conflicting and incoherent stories of his family and neighbors. Slater raved for an upward of 15 minutes, babbling in the backwoods dialect of green edifices of light, oceans of space, strange music, and shadowy mountains and valleys. But most of all did he dwell upon some mysterious blazing entity that shook and laughed and mocked at him. This vast, vague personality seemed to have done him a terrible wrong, and to kill it in triumphant revenge would be his paramount desire. In order to reach it, he said, he would soar through the abyss of emptiness, burning every obstacle that stood in his way. Thus ran his discourse, until with the greatest suddenness he ceased. The fire of madness died away from his eyes. In a dull wonder he looked upon the questioners, and asked why he was bound. Dr. Bernard unbuckled his leather harness, and did not restore it till night. When he succeeded in persuading Slater to don it on his own volitation, for his own good, the man had now admitted that he sometimes talked queerly, though he knew not why.